Hi everyone, today we'll be talking about absolute value inequalities. So just as a review, absolute value is the distance from zero, and it's always positive. When we want to solve an absolute value inequality, we want to start with isolating the absolute value, just like we did with the equation solving. Then we will create a compound inequality. All right, so if the inequality sign is less than or equal to, the absolute value represents a compound inequality with the word and. And a way to help us remember that is if we see less than, we're going to say less than and right there. If the inequality sign is greater than or equal to, the absolute value represents a compound inequality with the word or. So a way to help us remember that is greater. Right? So greater, less than. All right, so let's take a look at our next part. Okay, once we have that established of whether it's an and or an or, right, we'll create our two new inequalities and then solve. Our first inequality is going to be the same sign, same number. Just like when we did the absolute value equations, we'd have to split it up into two different equations. That second equation, we always changed that number on the other side of the equal sign to the opposite of what it was in the original equation. Well, same thing here, but now we also have the inequality symbol to look at. So we have to flip our sign and do the opposite number. So I like to say flip and switch. All right, so all we're going to do here is just rewrite the absolute value inequality as a compound inequality. All right, so first thing we're going to look at is it's less than. Okay, so remember less than, it's an and. All right, so we're going to have to put the word and in between. All right, now let's split it up. The first one is going to be the same. We just removed the absolute value brackets. The second one, and we're going to write our word and, because it's less than. Okay, our second one is where we're going to flip and switch. So the left side stays the same. We flip our sign, switch our number to the opposite. And at this point, that's all we're going to do. All right, let's do one more together. All right, so this time we have the greater symbol, greater than symbol. So greater, it's an or. All right, so let's split them up. The first one, again, is going to keep all the same numbers. Everything's going to stay the same. We just removed the absolute value symbols. It's greater, so we're going to put the word or. And now we can do the second one, where we're going to flip and switch. So we keep the first part the same, and then we flip the sign and switch the number to its opposite. And that's it for this part right now. All right, so I want you to do that with this one here. Try on your own. Go ahead and pause the video now. Okay, let's go to the next page. All right, now we're going to actually solve. So we're going to split them up, and then we're going to solve. And the first thing we have to make sure that we do, though, is we must have the absolute value on the left side. That's key. It must be on the left side. So we're going to have to flip this whole thing around first. Now notice how it's pointing to the 2 or it's open to the inequality. When we flip it, it has to keep that. So when we go to flip this around, here's my inequality. It's open to the inequality or it's pointing to the 2 still. All right, so now we look at our sign. It's a greater than symbol, so remember our greater. All right, let's split it up. All right, everything inside stays the same, and for the first one, the outside stays the same as well. So there we go. All right, now we have our or because it's greater. All right, and then we're gonna write our second one where we're going to flip and switch, so it becomes less than -2. All right, now we can solve, just like we solve any inequality. So I'm going to add 2 to both sides, which cancels those out. And we are left with -3k is greater than 4. I'm going to divide both sides by -3. And that leaves that, and then we'll get to that answer in a minute. I'll put up the answer at the end. All right, let's come over to here, and we're going to add 2 to both sides. Again, it's going to cancel out. Our solving is going to be the exact same. And then this time we're going to divide by -3. Now, the one thing we have to remember is when we divide by a negative number, it flips our inequality symbols. So now my first one, instead of being greater than, is going to become less than. My second one, instead of being less than, is going to become greater than. So k is less than -4/3. Remember, we're going to leave that as a fraction. Or k is greater than 0. And there's our answer. And now we're done with that one. All right, let's do this next one. Or actually, this one's a try on your own. All right, so go ahead and pause your video now. All right, let's take a look at our next example. What if? Can an absolute value be less than a negative number? Well, what did we say at the very first thing on the front page of our notes? We said that absolute values cannot be negative. This is saying that an absolute value is negative. Right? Well, what do we know about absolute values? They can't be negative. So no. Okay? So can an absolute value be less than a negative number? No, it can't, because it can't be negative. Anything less than a negative number is negative. So no. Okay? This means the answer is no solution. All right. Now, what if we have this one? We still have a negative number here. But can an absolute value be greater than a negative number? Yes, it can. It absolutely can, because positive numbers are greater than negative numbers. And remember, we said that an absolute value has to be positive. So all positive numbers are greater than negatives. Okay? So this means we need to create the compound inequality and solve. Right? So when we have these, we would then create our compound, we would then split them up just like normal, and then we would solve them. All right, so now let's take a look and solve and graph the following inequalities. So now we're going to bring in our graphing. All right, so we have our less than. Okay, so remember that's less than. All right, let's split them up. All right, so we're going to keep everything the same, just remove our absolute values. And we're going to keep the left side and then flip and switch. So flip and switch. All right, so let's go through and start solving this one. I need to isolate my variable, so I'm going to subtract 8 from both sides. Those cancel out. And we're left with -3m is less than or equal to 5. Now I can divide both sides by -3. Remember, when we divide by a negative number, that flips this middle side. So we end up with m is greater than or equal to -5/3. Keep it as a fraction. All right, let's follow the same procedure over here. So again, we need to isolate our variable term. So I'm going to subtract -8 from both sides. Cancels this out. Left with -3m is greater than or equal to -21. Can divide both sides by -3. And then when we do that, those cancel out, and we are left with m is less than or equal to 7. We divided by a negative sign, so our inequality symbol flipped. This is a less than, so we're going to put our and in the middle. And if we remember, the graphs for an and, okay, look like those dumbbells. So we're going to look at our symbols. So this one here has to be filled in, and this one has to be filled in. So we're going to put these numbers on here. I've got a 7, and I've got -5/3. They don't have to be, we don't have to put every single number on here. We just have to put these two numbers on there. Put a little space, make sure you got the smallest one to the left, the biggest one to the right. We don't need to fill in every single number. All right, so this one is going to be a closed circle, and this one is also going to be a closed circle. And because it's an and, we fill in everything in between. Okay, it's my dumbbell. All right, let's take a look at this one. We have a greater than symbol, so greater, it's an or. All right, let's split it. Okay. So, first one, everything stays the same, just remove the absolute value. Or, the second one, we're going to flip and switch. All right, let's solve. Let's isolate the variable, so I'm going to add 4 to both sides. Cancels this one out. And we are left with 4r is greater than 44. Now I can divide both sides by 4. Cancels out my 4's. And we are left with r is greater than 11. All right, now let's do this one here. Same thing. We're going to isolate the variable term by adding 4 to both sides. Cancels those out. And we're left with 4r is less than negative 36. I'm going to divide both sides by 4. Okay, and then we're going to cancel out the 4. Okay, once we've canceled those out, we are now left with r is less than negative 9. And remember, it's greater, or. So this is where our graph looks like a set of boat oars. All right, so we're going to take a look at where our circles need to go. We need to have a negative 9 and a positive 11. Again, we don't need to fill in every single number on here. We just need to have our two numbers. I've got a negative 9 and I've got an 11. So again, leave some space between them. Okay? And now let's take a look. My negative 9 is going to be an open circle. There's no line underneath, so I'm going to put my open circle. And then I'm going to do the same thing here at the 11. All right, it's or. So when we go to graph, okay, they're going to look like a set of boat oars. That means they're going to go in opposite directions. So this one, my negative 9, is going to go to the left. If I can find it. Where did that graph go? All right, we'll draw that one in. So it's going to go to the left. All right, let's put this one in. Oops. All right, and thicken that up a little bit. So to the left. All right, and then this one here, my r is greater than 11, so it's going to go to the right, just like that. So those are our boat oars. They go in opposite directions. All right, let's go to the next page and give this one here a try on your own. Go ahead and pause the video now. All right, here is our last example, and then one more try on your own. We're going to solve and graph the following inequality. Write your answer in set builder notation. Let's pay attention to that. All right, so now we have this extra little bit. So remember when we solved the equations, we had to first isolate the inequality part. So we are first going to subtract the 5 from both sides. Right, all we're doing right now, whoops. All we're trying to do right now is get the inequality or the absolute value part by itself. So once we've done that, we're left with 3 times the absolute value of 2x minus 1. All right, we are not going to distribute the 3. We are instead going to divide both sides by 3. That's how we're going to get rid of this 3. We divide both sides by 3. Now we have this inequality left, this absolute inequality left. All right, so here we have our less than. So remember, that's less than. All right, so let's split it. Now that we've isolated the absolute value part, now we can split it. So first time, we leave everything the same, remove the absolute value. Second time, we flip and switch. So flip and switch. All right, let's go ahead and solve. I'm going to add 1 to both sides. Then we're left with 2x is less than 4. Then I'm going to divide both sides by 2. And we are left with x is less than 2. All right, this side, we're going to add 1 to both sides. Well, now we're down to 2x is greater than negative 2. Divide both sides by 2. And we have x is greater than negative 1. Okay, and then we have an and. All right, so what does this look like in set builder notation? So we can write it this way. Okay? X is greater than negative 1 and x is greater than negative 2. The other way we can write it is I can take this one here and I can flip it around so that I've got x is, oops, I should say negative 1 is less than x. And then I can take that x is less than 2. So if I flip them around, I can overlap my x's like that. So I took the smaller one and wrote it backwards. And then I can overlap my x's. And when I do that, the set builder looks like this. And it's basically saying all my x values are between negative 1 and 2. All right, so here's my negative 1 and my 2. Okay, it's an and, so it's a dumbbell. So I'm going, and then I have no lines, so both sides are open circles. And then I fill in the middle. All right, I want you guys to go ahead and complete the last one on your own. I'll see you in class next time.